Welcome to part 8. In this final part, we will review servlets and filters in OSGI environments. More precisely, we will look at only one case, Sling servlets and filters in AEM. After listening to this part, you should be able to create a Sling servlet, create a Sling filter, invoke a service from servlet using reference, be able to use this servlet resolver page. Let me remind you that Sling is a REST-based web framework built on top of OSGI. Content-driven, that means the framework first finds the content render, then determines how to render it based on the request. And it supports multiple programming languages for rendering scripts. In this part, we will concentrate on Sling servlets and filters. We will not discuss rendering pages and components. So, just like a generic web application, you create your own servlet and Sling by extending from a base class. Sling offers two base classes to extend from: one, Sling Safe Method Servlets and Sling All Method Servlet. Safe methods means the methods that do not modify data, that is get and head. All methods is for all HTTP methods including post, put, delete, etc. Sling offers various ways of binding servlets. We can use path, method, resource type, extension, and selectors. Let's go to our training project and create a simple servlet. So here is the project and there is already a servlet package. Let's create one more servlet here. Hello servlet extends Sling Safe Method Servlet. Let's override to get method and let me paste some code here. So some very simple code to produce some very simple output. Set the content type HTML and just print the hello world in the response writer. Please note that the method takes a Sling HTTP servlet request and Sling HTTP servlet response as the arguments. So let's take a look at them. So Sling request provides a few useful methods. Here are some of them. Get resource. It returns the resource that is currently being rendered. Get resource resolver. This is a way to get the resource resolver. Get request path info returns a request path in a Sling way that is structured with a methods to get selectors, extensions, suffix, and so on. Get request parameter returns a request parameter instance. It is a Sling class that supports getting, for example, an uploaded file as a request parameter. Let's see them how the specific of Sling HTTP servlet request. As for Sling HTTP servlet response, it does not add important methods. Now let's see how a Sling request is annotated. The way recommended by OSGI 6 is to annotate a servlet as a component and specify a servlet as the service interface. Let me point out that is a difference from how it was done before OSGI release 6. If you work on a long-lasting project, it is possible that you come across an older approach that uses Sling servlet annotation. That annotation is now deprecated. So, after annotating a servlet, we need to specify the request that our servlet handles. The recommended way of doing this does not look very convenient, but that is a recommended way and it works. You list the properties as a comma separated list of a string in an element called property. You can see here property. Each string is a key value pair and there is no syntax check. You can find the list of supported properties in the Sling website. If you Google for a Sling Servlet properties, let's do that. Sling Servlet properties. And here is the list of properties with the description. In production applications, the most common usage of a custom servlet is web services that are accessible by specific path. So you usually specify a path as an attribute. Let's do that in our demo project. Here is the demo project and I am annotating with component and specify a servlet class as the service interface. And add the property called the property. And then let me copy paste the following values. So here Sling Servlet paths property is multi-valued. We are binding the servlet with two paths. So this is the service welcome and service hello. Let me deploy and demonstrate. Done. Let's go to the browser and check. So I type the service and welcome into that URL and it printed the output that our servlet produces hello world. Let's check the other path, that is the services hello. Same output here. So some other attributes can be used to bind the servlet that has a combinations of resource type plus extension. Let's bind our servlet for example CSV extension, and I am going to put the following. Now instead of the path I specified a resource type and the value is Sling Servlet default, which is a super type of all resource types, and Sling Servlet extension, which is CSV. Let me deploy again. Done. Now let's see what our services produce. Here it returns output from some default processor. Now let's render a page from a demo application that comes with AEM by default vRetail. It is already rendered and now let's change the extension to CSV. And you see now hello world is shown when we access some resource and specify that CSV as an extension. Now let's bind a servlet to a resource type plus selector. So resource type is the same, and selector is hello. Let's try it now. Done. So instead of this extension, let's say hello.html, and we are getting the same output. So demonstrated the binding of a servlet to a path, extension, and the selector. Now let's see how to resolve the servlet binding. I'm switching to AEM console. AEM web console contains a Sling servlet page resolver. That's under a Sling and Sling servlet resolver. In this, you can enter a URL path and verify which servlet will be responsible for handling the request. So now let me enter the home page of a demo VRetail application. Resolve. Now the resolver shows the request will be handled by page.jsp, and below are the default ones. These ones. Let's now try with .json. Resolve. And now page.jsp is not in the line to process this request. The first in line is default get servlet. And now let's try a path to which we bound our servlet is hello.json maybe. Resolve. And now it says that the first in line to process the request is our hello servlet. Now let's return to annotations. We have just tried configuring a servlet by specifying properties as a strings in property element of a component annotation that does not require any additional libraries, and it may happen that you see exactly that approach in your project. There is, however, a more elegant alternative that require several manipulations. If you upgrade the Maven bundle plugin to 4.1.0 and if you add Apache Sling Servlet annotations library, you will get access to Sling Servlet annotations. For example, there is a Sling Servlet paths that lets you bind a servlet to a specific paths. There is also a Sling Servlet resource types that lets you bind servlet to a combinations of a resource types, selectors, or extensions. Let's do that. Let's do that in a main form XML and correct the version to 4.1.0. Let's add a dependency to this form. Here. And let's also add the corresponding dependency to the form of the core project. Now let's change the annotations of the servlet. We keep a component annotations here. But now let's add the following Sling Servlet paths. Let me copy paste from the slide. I'll be going to remove these properties and paste in this Sling Servlet paths. And also let's add Sling Servlet resource types. Let's deploy. Done. Now let's check. So all those bindings should work now. So first hello.csv, because we bounded to both the extension and the selector. Yeah. And if you just try a selector, it won't work. It will render the page. And now let's check the rendering by path. Services hello. And now we see the responses from our hello servlet. So this is the way, a more convenient way of annotating the servlet. Now let's talk about the Sling filters. Let me remind that filters are part of the Servlet API and used when there is a need to modify the response, transform it somehow, or modify request by tampering to these parameters or headers or both. You can create a filter by implementing filter interface when you annotate with component annotation and specify javax servlet.filter as the service class. The example project we created the filter called login filter. Here it is. Let's examine how it works. So you see that it is annotated with component annotation, service class, and there are several properties here, and one of them is the scope, Sling filter scope, and this value is set to request, filter scope request, which means that the filter is invoked every time when the request is made. And the code that do filter method code that shows that it's just logged some request parameters every time request is made. Now let's see the output. For that, let's go to Sling login, Sling log support, and let's add some new log file. So the package is our package. com.training.osgi.core.filters. Let name this log as a AEM filter, AEM filter.log. AEM filter.log, and let's set log level to debug and save. Now let's invoke the home page of the vRetail application. Almost done. Now let's see the output. Under the logs. Here AEM filter. Let me open it. Now we can see that here everything is logged from the slash content we retail USEN etc. So every resource that was requested when rendering a page including some JavaScript. Now let's add filtering by URL pattern in the filter. That can be done by specifying a property. So here in the property element, let's have this filter pattern that equals content we retail USEN. Let's also change a scope from a request to component. Now let's build and deploy. And also I see CSS and images as well. Let's remember how OSGI services can be referenced. So if you are in OSGI component and want to inject the service, you just add the reference annotation. If you are in model class and here is the Sling specific in the model class, you can use inject annotation. Now let's demonstrate that. So let's do that both in our demo project. So here let's open our servlet and let's declare a variable of type string generator, and let's print in here string generator output, and we annotate the string generator here. Here it's a servlet, so it's a reference annotation. Now we also have a Sling model in the project. Here it is. So here we declare a string generator and we use inject annotation for this. And let's manipulate the output print. This is generated string. Now let's build and deploy the application. Let's remember how OSGI services can be referenced. So if you are in OSGI component and want to inject the service, you just add the reference annotation. If you are in model class and here is the Sling specific in the model class, you can use inject annotation. Now let's demonstrate that. So let's do that both in our demo project. So here let's open our servlet and let's declare a variable of type string generator, and let's print in here string generator output, and we annotate the string generator here. Here it's a servlet, so it's a reference annotation. Now we also have a Sling model in the project. Here it is. So here we declare a string generator, and we use inject annotation for this. And let's manipulate the output print. This is generated string. Now let's build and deploy the application. Done. Now let's check out the result. So let's try to invoke the servlet first. Here, along with string hello world, it prints out the generated string. You can see here. And now check out the model. For that, let's run the VRTL page that comes with our application. Here it is. It doesn't look pretty, however, the model says this is generated string, and here is the generated string. So we now invoked an OSGI component from as a servlet and from a Sling model. Now to summarize, AEM uses Sling framework that integrates OSGI with the web container. Sling allows you to create a servlet and filters. To create a servlet, extends from one of the Sling servlet classes and annotate it as a component with servlet service interface. You can bind a servlet to a path or to a resource type using properties. Apache Sling Servlet's annotation offers an improved way of specifying properties, but requires a newer version of the Maven bundle plugin. You can check servlet binding in the web console on a servlet resolver page. To create a Sling filter, implements a filter interface and annotate it as a component with filter service interface. In the model classes, reference component using @inject annotation. So we reach the end of the OSGI module. Thank you for your attention.